Today, we're digging into the Canadian economy, which, frankly, is stuck between a rock and a hard place. You've got its oldest, biggest trading partner on one side and a new global superpower on the other. And believe me, the choices Canada makes right now are going to define its future for decades. So let's break it all down. It really all kicks off with this incredibly blunt statement from the President of the United States. Now, when the leader of a country that buys up 3/4 of your exports says your products are irrelevant, well, that's not just political noise. That's an economic earthquake. And this forces a really tough question, one that everyone from politicians in Ottawa to executives on Bay Street is scrambling to answer. If your number one partner suddenly decides you're disposable, what do? I mean, where do you even go from there? So this is the core of it, right? This is Canada's high-stakes dilemma. It's being forced to play this incredibly tricky game on two fronts. It's trying to manage all this heat from Washington, while at the very same time trying to build new bridges with the world's other economic giant. And you can see that happening in real time. As all this is going down with the US, you've got the Prime Minister boarding a flight to Beijing. Look, this isn't just some routine diplomatic visit. It's a loud and clear signal of a strategic pivot. It's a major move in a global chess game, and the stakes couldn't be higher. So you might be asking, why this sudden scramble to pivot? To really get that, you've got to look at the numbers behind the Canada-US relationship. And wow, when you see them, you realize just how incredibly dependent Canada has become. Just take a look at this. It's kind of stunning. A full 75%, yep, 3/4, of everything Canada sells to the rest of the world goes to one country, the United States. To put that in perspective, China, the second largest economy on the planet, buys just 5%. This isn't just a trade relationship, you guys. For Canada, it is an economic lifeline. And this right here, this really shows you how lopsided that relationship is. For Canada, all that cross-border trade makes up about 1/3 of its entire economy, its GDP. But for the massive US economy, it's just a tiny blip, only a few percentage points. And that imbalance, it gives Washington a huge amount of leverage in any argument. And that leverage isn't just some abstract idea. The threat of a 25% tariff on key Canadian products like steel and cars is very, very real. Economists are pretty clear on this one. Tariffs that high could absolutely be enough to tip Canada's economy into a full-blown recession. This is the real-world risk of that dependency we just talked about. So, faced with all this pressure, Canada starts looking east. The big question, though, is whether pivoting to China is a realistic solution. Can it actually be a viable alternative? Now, on the surface, it seems like a no-brainer, right? If the US market gets shaky, just sell more stuff to China. But as that trip to Beijing shows, this path is loaded with its own set of very complicated risks. It is not the easy fix some people might think it is. This table really lays out the whole gamble. On the one hand, yeah, the opportunities are massive. A huge market for Canadian resources, a real chance to become less reliant on the US. But the risks are just as big. I mean, Beijing has a history of using trade as a political weapon, suddenly blocking imports when they're not happy about something. And on top of that, you've got China's own economy slowing down, plus major security concerns. It really makes you wonder, is this just trading one dependency for another? And China is absolutely encouraging this pivot. This quote from Chinese officials says it all. They're not just offering to buy more lumber or canola. They're framing it as a geopolitical choice. They're actively pushing Canada to find its own strategic autonomy. And that just adds another layer of tension to this already tricky balancing act. Okay, so these high-level trade wars and geopolitical power moves, they don't just happen in a bubble. They have real consequences for everyday people. So let's bring this right down to the ground level and ask, how is all this pressure affecting the cost of living for the average Canadian? So, who's got it better, Canada or the US? Well, the answer is, it's complicated. In Canada, daily life can definitely feel more expensive. Groceries, for example, are often 10 to 20% more. But that cost is balanced by a universal healthcare system paid for through taxes. Down in the US, you might find cheaper stuff at the store and pay lower income tax, but you're on the hook for potentially astronomical healthcare bills. So which country is cheaper really depends on your own personal situation. And bubbling underneath all of this is a long-term problem at home that just makes everything feel worse. This chart shows productivity growth, which is basically just a measure of how efficiently a country works. And for years, Canada's has been lagging behind the US. This weak productivity makes the whole economy more fragile and less able to handle shocks like tariffs, and it's a big reason why people are feeling that financial squeeze. So you've got external pressure, a risky pivot, and weakness at home. Given all of that, what's the game plan? Well, policymakers in Canada have laid out a three-part strategy for how they plan to navigate this really uncertain economic future. It's a pretty practical three-pronged attack. Step one is to defend. Do whatever you have to do to keep that access to the US market as stable as possible. Step two, diversify. You know the saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket? That's this. Patiently build stronger trade ties with Europe, the UK, and Asia. And finally, step three, fix the home front. You gotta tackle those core problems at home, like weak productivity and the crazy cost of housing, to build up your economic strength from the inside out. So what does all this mean for the next couple of years? Well, the official forecast is for pretty modest growth, somewhere around 1.5%. Look, that's not a free fall, but it's definitely not a boom either. It basically signals a period of slow, careful steering through some very choppy waters. It's the very definition of being at a crossroads. Which, of course, leaves us with the billion-dollar question. Is this a real turning point? A moment where Canada actually forges a new, more independent economic path? Or are the forces of geography and history just too strong, meaning its destiny is forever tied to its powerful southern neighbor? The choices being made right now will answer that question for a generation.